Welcome to Cognitive Vigilance Podcast. I'm here with Ben Weir and the fabulous Bob Murphy. Bob, you are an economist. You want to give a little... One, how did you first become how did you get interested in economics?
It was the girls.
The girl... Yeah, it's definitely a ladies.
Yeah, I saw either professional athletes, musicians, or economists. No, I mean, how big of a story do you want me to get into? My dad listened to Rush Limbaugh. I don't know if you guys know who that was.
I know Rush. Yeah.
Okay, and then I got into that, and that was like when I was in junior high. I once advocated the social studies teacher had us do a proposal to make society better. And I said we should get rid of money, right? So that's where I was coming from as of junior high, and then listening to Rush Limbaugh with my dad, and driving me around. I was like, oh, sometimes a government program might not achieve what its ostensible aim is. And then I just started reading more stuff. I got into like conservative writers and realized, oh no, it's the libertarians that I actually like more. And then it was like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams that I love the most. Read Henry Hazlitt. I found Murray Rothbard, and by the senior year of high school, I knew I wanted to be not just an economist, but an Austrian school economist.
Oh, wow. So you knew that was what you wanted that young.
Yeah.
Wow. And what was it that attracted you to the Austrians the most?
Just the clarity of their writing. So like with Rothbard in particular, I didn't agree with every single thing he said, but even if I disagreed with him, I knew, it's step 7 in his argument that, is where I part company with him. So he was very clear and logical. And just to go back to your earlier question, besides my goofy joke, what attracted me to it was just this, the self-regulating properties of it, and how you could have the social system that people are just trying to make money or whatever, and they end up serving their fellow man, and government programs to try to, raise the minimum wage can backfire and hurt the very people that they're supposedly going to help. Things like that. I just thought that was fascinating, and the more I studied that, the more interested I got in it.
So were you pretty economically? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that's the same reason that I went to school for economics as well. It's the ladies, and obviously it worked for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wait, Bob, do you consider yourself an ANCAP?
Yeah, I don't volunteer that. I mean, because I think you guys know I'm Christian now, and so for a while I thought, there's a sense in which I'm a monarchist, and because I have a king. But yes, in terms of if I'm at a libertarian conference and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, are you an anarchist?" I'll say yes, because I know what they mean as opposed to a minarchist or something. So yes, I'm full blown. That to me, state or libertarian theory, how could you privatize everything except 2 of the most important elements of civil society?
We bicker about that all the time because she's a minarchist, but she says, "Well, I'm an anarchist in theory," and I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, so you're
philosophically
you're an you're an
but
anarchist."
I just don't think it's realistic. I don't think
well, neither is minarchy.
That's not trry. I feel like minarchy is more realistic than anarchy. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do the debate now.
I think Steph, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but Stephan Kinsella had an interesting thing on that, Brandy. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like he was responding when people would say, "Oh, but how would it work?" or whatever. And he was kind of sidestepping and saying, "I'm not even saying it would work. I'm just saying in terms of the value system and is it moral to, take money from everybody at gunpoint in order to fund a police fort?" No, it's not, So again, I'm not doing justice to it, but I used to, in other words, he was kind of thinking that there's no, the two don't go hand in hand, that, you could.
That actually, I had a question written down to ask you, and it kind of plays into this. So how do you integrate moral philosophy with economic analysis? And do you think that economics should basically be value neutral? Because when it comes to, this is kind of in my opinion, this is Keynesian versus Austrian economics. Keynesian seems like it's more moral philosophy driven than, obviously the other. Whereas I think, to me, when I look at Austrian economics, it feels just more value neutral. You're not trying to integrate your personal feelings into it. It's just these are what is set. This is what is true. It's, in my opinion, less theory, more just fact of how money works.
Yeah. So there's different ways of trying to answer that. So I'll try to just give like little bursts of the different layers. So I totally understand what you're saying, that if what you mean is, hey, economics, should it be an objective science, whether people want to use that term science, or if you don't like that, like rigorous field or objective set of technical propositions about how the world really does work, regardless of your personal viewpoint about that or preferences. If that's what you mean, then yes, economics is value free, or should be. And, and Mises wrote about that extensively. The German word was like Wertfrei, I think. I'm sure I butchered that. So that's true. But what's interesting is like the Adam Smith and David Hume and people like that, like they were moral philosophers, right? And so there is that element. And also I would say part of what creeps me out about like modern monetary theory or MMT, when they will say, oh no, man, we're just saying how the world works, we're not endorsing it, is it creeps me out. Just how casually they're like, oh yeah, like, what gives currency a demand? It's just the taxation. So it's kind of neat. If you want to get people to do what you want as a government, you just point guns at them and then they do it. Isn't that kind of a neat system? And so, and I am repulsed by that. And also just another element to what you're saying is I do agree. I think a lot of the people who support Keynesian economics, for example, it's because they want to have a justification for the government doing the programs they want. And so I think that's, partly what's going to drive that. And certainly right, now, like as we're recording this, like the big thing is Kamala Harris's price gouging stuff. And it's pretty predictable that the economists who come out as to why that's a bad idea, in terms of the economics, their value system, they're very much opposed to government intervention on philosophical grounds, and vice versa is also true, that the economists that are like, oh no, this works. And the economics supports this, economic science. It's also in terms of their value system, they're fine with it. So I guess it's very rare to see an economist who will say something like, oh yes, I agree. If the government did X, Y, and Z, that would make the recession shorter. But I just don't think they have the constitutional or the moral authority to do that. I think the recession should take longer just because that's the right thing to do. Barely anybody ever says that. It's usually that their objective, neutral, scientific economic analysis just so happens to justify whatever their sort of moral, views were. And probably why that may happen in practice is because on the front end, if you're interested in economics and you think the government, it's fine for the government to take from rich people and give to poor people, you're probably going to be more attracted to Keynesian economists, and vice versa. If that really offends you morally, taxation's theft, you're probably going to find, wow, this Murray Rothbard guy is very compelling. Right. So,
right.
I kind of like basically covered every possible answer to your question I could have as a good economist would. So that was actually self-deprecating. So am I answering your question?
Oh yeah, that was perfect. I mean, like, so when I was in school, and I honestly, like, I took, I think 8-9 years off of school, and then went back and switched my major to economics afterwards. So I had a little bit more to go off of because I was already an anarcho-capitalist, big fan of, Austrian economics. And I'm looking at these people, already have studied like all of these incredible economists over time and just, libertarian type philosophers. And I'm just like, you guys are all just guessing, aren't you? You guys want to do what makes you feel good. Isn't that what's happening right now? Like Rothbard, I think I mentioned once or twice. I think we talked about Sowell a couple times, but like really for the most part, like this side of economics doesn't even really get addressed, when it comes to actually the schooling side of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandy. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, what about Milton Friedman? He's not really Austrian, but like, is he still like relevant when you learn economics? I feel like
a little bit. I mean, I don't think.
Are you talking about at college at the undergrad?
In college, yeah.
Where,
most of the learning.
Can I ask where you went? Just out of curiosity.
Sac State.
Okay.
Yeah. But it felt like, for the most part, a lot of the stuff I learned about like economics, as I see it, Austrian economics, was obviously outside of school and on my own research. Right. I think that's how most things are anyways. So
to answer that, certainly the standard curricula at undergrad institutions in terms of, the standard econ sequence, or like if you're a business major and the classes you got to take for econ in order to get that kind of a degree.
Yeah.
Or, accounting.
And I have no interest in getting a master's either. So it was you know what I mean? Like,
So that stuff, it's definitely probably got to put a label on it. It's probably new Keynesian, probably covers most of it. Because even guys like Greg Mankiw, who are, considered, they're Republican conservatives. And I think he was the chair of the CEA under the George W. Bush administration, at least for a couple of years, something like that. That's still like it's free market friendly. It's kind of like, we know socialism doesn't work and we got to rely on markets, but you can't just have unfettered laissez-faire. The outcomes would be socially unacceptable. And so you got to have certain limits put in. So I think economists of that genre or flavor, if you made them, at gunpoint, you say it's either got to be 100% laissez-faire or top-down central planning like the Soviet Union, they would say, pure capitalism. Mm-hmm. But they're thinking, but we don't have to make that stark choice. We can kind of have a more moderate system in the middle. And to Brandon, your point, Milton Friedman is a big gun. Like that's still, people could hold him up as an icon. And he did, he had technical papers in the top journals. He wasn't just a popularizer, whereas got, people in that, like people right now that at the top universities in econ departments, they might not have even heard of Murray Rothbard. And if they did, they would say, well, let me go look up what he wrote. And like, he's got one publication in the 1960s or something in a journal that we care about. And the other stuff, that's just him writing stuff.
That's pretty much what it was like.
The lay people. So that's they would just dismiss it as like, this isn't even, and even a lot of card-carrying Austrians in academia now poo-poo Murray Rothbard. They're more about Hayek and Kerzner and, and that sort of wing of the Austrian tradition for that very reason. Like, Murray Rothbard's not respectable. These other guys, are more respected in academia. So lots of people can say that even at NYU in the PhD program there was one guy who had heard of Hayek and he talked about him favorably, right? Because, it disperse knowledge and how that helps coordinate and blah, 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 and they, so there is that element. And a lot of it is simply just the mathematical formalism that a lot of what the Austrians write, like a modern economist would look at that and they would just, this isn't even modern economics. This is like from the 1800s. What is this?
Yeah. So Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell were like my gateway away from being a commie. Like they were like the first people that I really read. And so I mean, but I don't think either of them are Austrian. Well, obviously they're not. And Thomas Sowell isn't either, but like they're great, like entry level. I feel like for someone kind of like moving away from the left, like I feel like I wouldn't be like, here, read Rothbard. Like I feel like I'd be like, read Thomas Sowell, like let's get your feet wet and then maybe you could move on to the other things. Because that's how it was for me. And then I moved from reading Friedman and Sowell to Mises and Hayek, and like then just kept going in that direction. So I think that but then when I tell libertarians that, they're like, oh, statists, and I'm like, well, what do you want from me?
Yeah, that was like I said, it was the op-ed pieces from Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell that first got me into like knowing, I really, really like his economics. And then, I think
economics in one lesson was a great.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That was really good
as well.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
That's what took me in the Austrian school, because it was I got a subscription to National Review, and then there was an earthquake or something. And politicians were saying, well, at least it will stimulate GDP growth or something, something dumb like that. And so some guy writing in the National Review magazine said, Henry Hazlitt must be rolling over in his grave, because that was one of the chapters. So that's what got me to read. Oh, so I got that book. And then I think in the introduction or the foreword or something, Hazlitt thanked Ludwig von Mises. And so that's what put, that name. I was like, oh, who's this guy? And then I read Human Action as a senior in high school. I'm not saying I understood it, but I did sit down and, read the whole thing. And that's what I just said, this is, and I must have been getting Rothbard around that time as well.
See, that's my trajectory too. I'll be reading a book and then I'll be like, oh, who's that guy? And then I look them up and then that's how I find like other things to read. So, and correlating to this, seeing as we're talking about school and stuff, I had a question in like, how do we encourage economic literacy for future generations? I mean, even for like the current population, but like they might be too far gone, but like maybe for future generations, what do you think we could do to make people understand economics a little bit better?
Well, I think there's just a whole host of resources available at this point. So yes, some of the classic things. And what I myself try to not forget about is it's so tempting to want to jump into like the real arcane disputes and argue with, some other anarcho-capitalist about the tenets of Georgism or something when no, people are, talking about, well, why don't we just cap grocery store prices, that kind of stuff. So there's that element that I remind myself, like, I wouldn't have gotten, down this rabbit hole had it not been for somebody talking about, like I said, that earthquake and then the politicians clamoring for, or rather saying, at least this will stimulate the economy. If someone hadn't written on that, I wouldn't have found this stuff. So there's all, it's actually almost the flip side problem. There's so much stuff available now that you don't know where to go. Like, there's I was looking at the Tuttle twins books. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's my 4-year-old. I have a bunch of those because I'm working on a project for them. And so I had all like their inventory or their catalog, I should say. And my 4-year-old picked up one about, it was basically iPencil, but and I was reading through it and I was like, oh, they really did a good job on it's taking it and expanding it. There's lots of homeschool type curricula. So to answer your question, I think if you can do it, try to homeschool your kids, at least when they're younger, just because you could just give them really good stuff to read and, have them watch videos and things on these issues. Cause it's like I had a book called Lessons for the Young Economist. And partly what we were trying to do with that is we realized what we were doing as Austrians was basically taking everybody who had learned and grown up with Keynesian economics and then trying to deprogram them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It was just as if we broke them out of a cult and then we were trying to, and then we realized, why don't we just teach them sound principles, up front instead of them thinking that, oh yeah, when the government spends money, that clearly makes us wealthier as long as, and so that's, I think there's a wealth of material, like I say, in a lot of homeschooling courses, people can go and look at stuff that's all, you don't even have to buy anything. There's all sorts of stuff that's free.
That kind of brings up the question. So obviously, we're expecting later this year.
Yep. Congratulations, guys, by the way.
Are children a normal good or an inferior good?
They're not luxury. Yeah, they're I guess they would be normal, right? And I'm trying to remember what the definitions are. Yeah. No, I knew you were, but I panicked for a second, like, shoot, what does that mean again? So
right.
It's been a while since I've taught that stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree. I feel like with economic literacy, it is probably better to start younger, because it is probably more like breaking them out of a cult the older they are.
Do you think that
and how deep they are? I mean, I feel like it was like me really leaving my kind of Marxist socialist perspective it's like it's a complete paradigm shift. Like your brain just kind of breaks for a second.
Now, are you engaging in hyperbole, or were you really like a Marxist at one point? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, and I still appreciate Peter Kropotkin. You know who Peter Kropotkin is? I'm a big fan of mutual aid and the concept of voluntary associations and utilizing that for things that the government does. But yeah, I would have called myself a communist. So yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I know Thomas Sowell, I think, was an actual Marxist.
Yeah. That's why he's the first person. So it was him and then Milton Friedman, because it was, because I knew he was a communist too. And so but before I really read, it was because of the things I was experiencing in the job market. So having to pay tax and what I was experiencing as someone working, starting a business, all these things. And so it made me look at things very differently than I did when I wasn't doing that. And I also would work under the table for a lot of jobs and not pay taxes as well. So, yeah, so it really started there where it was more life experience and then became more moderate. It was a slow kind of, and then I ended up libertarian. So here we are.
Yeah, I think Kropotkin, if I'm not getting him mixed up with one of those other left anarchist types, I think he had a passage or an essay or something on authority that really resonated with me. It was something like, I can defer to the shoemaker or the cobbler, he might have called him, about he can make a better shoe than I can, but that's all voluntary. You know what I mean? It's not like he has the ability to force me to wear shoes that I don't like. I'm butchering, it was very eloquent.
I think I know. Yeah, I think you're right. He was, because he was writing letters to Lenin all pissed off because of the authoritarian overreach going on in the Soviet Union, because obviously he was an anarchist, commie anarchist, but still an anarchist, and didn't agree with what was going on. Emma Goldman. And And Lenin, after he died, Lenin like banned all of his writing. Like they've just banned everything.
Do you think that there's a direct correlation between the economy just getting astronomically worse and more people buying into Austrian economics? Like, I think that, like, obviously for the most part, Austrian economics is an extreme minority in the people who even understand economics at all.
Mhm.
But looking at places like Argentina, where they just elected an anarcho-capitalist, it makes me think that, like, maybe if inflation is 200% year over year, maybe they're going to start actually caring, or maybe they're going to keep just living on that welfare and not really complaining too much. I don't know. It's just a hypothetical, but
yeah, I think certainly what happens is when the mainstream system starts breaking down, people pay more attention to heterodox perspectives. So I think that's why you're seeing a research, like, it's unfortunate. So yes, the interest in Austrian economics is much higher now. When I was at NYU, people barely even knew what it was. Like, so late 90s, early 2000s, people barely knew what it was. And then it was really the Ron Paul campaign where enough people knew what it was to make fun of it. You know what I mean? Whereas before, it's like he wouldn't even mock you because they didn't even know what the heck it was. And so that, but it's gotten much better there. Like, just to give you an idea, the advice to graduate students who wanted to have a career as a college professor, if they like the Austrian stuff, the old advice, like when I was coming up, like let's say in the 90s, was just keep that under the radar. Just be like on paper, look like a mainstream economist, publish your stuff, get tenure. And then once they can't fire you, then go, surprise, I'm an Austrian. But then the advice slowly shifted as more and more Austrians got beachheads, in various departments. And then in some schools, it's like they actually run the department. It's an Austrian department, not just that they got one guy teaching micro, that might assign Rothbard or something on the side. Then the advice flipped to, if you're an Austrian, you got to let the world know that, because for the 5 spots that are available next year, around the country, they got to know who you are to be able for you to get in that spot. You know what I mean? So anyways, I'm just saying that has shifted over time.
And
but
obviously the national debt is like through the roof. It's going crazy. And like, honestly, like there's no such thing as an 8-year plan to fix the debt problem, right? So every president kind of runs on that.
Right.
The only time we've ever gotten out of the debt was, I think we got into like $75 million of debt right after the American Revolution. It took them 50 years to pay that off. And we finally had no debt as a country in like the 1840s or something. But like now we're $33 trillion in debt. It's never disappearing. At this point, the best we can do is manage that, come up with a plan to, I mean, at least pay the interest on that debt.
Yeah.
Which we're not doing, I don't think. But
that's one of the things Andrew Jackson did. It wasn't just that he balanced the budget. He literally paid off the federal debt. And he got rid of the second bank of the United States, which was, his era's version of the Fed. So that was kind of, he may have not treated the Indians kindly. So, he wasn't a perfect guy from a libertarian perspective, but that showed it could have been done. You're right. At this point, nobody's even pretending, except Trump once in a while when he's boasting in his last campaign, how he's going to pay the debt off. Yeah. I mean, it has shifted now. That's kind of what I was getting at to answer your earlier question. So it would be nice if I'm just looking at the Austrian schools and say, oh yeah, we just keep making progress in terms of becoming more and more accepted. Certainly among financial professionals after the housing crash, when, and then with the financial crisis in 2008, like my phone was ringing off the hook. I was going around giving talks to not like undergrad libertarian groups, but, like mainstream, like adults who worked in the financial sector for a living. Like they just wanted to know what the heck just happened. I didn't show up saying this is Austrian business cycle theory, but that's what I was basically showing them. And they're like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense than what the guys on CNBC are saying. And certainly than what, Chairman Bernanke was saying. But at the same time, I noticed like MMT people have gained more currency too. And the post Keynesians and probably Marxism has made a comeback too. So it's, everyone knows the system is not working. And so the people who are like on the fringes saying, these people are crazy, this is why our view is the right one, like they're going to get more and more followers.
Can you just like give a brief explanation of what MMT, what they believe?
Sure. So it stands for Modern Monetary Theory. And I think it's named that to try to show like, hey, we're just saying how the world works. And this is the modern system with governments issuing fiat money, right? So this isn't like a gold standard. And it's not just like a household or a corporation. They would say there's something qualitatively different when you analyze a system where the money is being issued by a political sovereign. And that's why they think that all the standard, all the economists who are basically treating the government like it's a big corporation and, well, hey, if we want to have a new program, we got to pay for it somehow, right? Like, because that's what a household or a corporation would have to do. And they're saying, no, that's totally wrong. Let's take the U.S. government. They create dollars. There's no constraint on that. So if we want to have a Green New Deal, if we want to fund a Mars base, if we want to have universal health care, stop saying, how are we going to pay for it? We can print money. Now, they're not completely naive. They won't just say, and that's the end of the story. We can just have everything we want just by printing money. They'll admit if we're printing too much money and the government spending, draws too many real resources away from other uses, then you're going to see a crunch and, then scarcity will kick in and you'll see, unemployment go down to real low levels and wages will start skyrocketing and stuff will get expensive. And that's how we will know you got to back off. But until we hit that point, go ahead and keep spending. That's actually good. That creates jobs and, fulfills aggregate demand and so forth. So to answer your question, the basic thing is they're saying there's something qualitatively different and we need a framework that views, among other things, they'll say when the government runs a deficit, that adds net assets to the private sector. And that's the only thing that can, right? That if a corporation saves more, if a private household wants to save more, they get IOUs from somebody else, and then that person must be in debt, right? So the two things kind of cancel out. That if Jim saves more, it's because Mary borrows more. And so it kind of on net, the only way that all of us in the private sector can have assets on net is if something outside the private sector owes us the money. And what's that? Oh, it's the government. So they kind of flip it on its head where the government deficit shows how much assets we in the private sector are gaining. And the accounting is not wrong. I think it's just misleading. But, I've seen some of their proponents give talks like that and they kind of, spin the crowd on their head and they're like, oh, wow. Okay. And then they end up thinking, so we can have a Green New Deal. We can have, universal health care and it's not even going to be painful. Like it's just these fuddy-duddy economists who are either liars or they're stupid and we don't need to listen to them.
I mean, it is kind of like this trend on TikTok where these like young girls will be like, this is paper. Why can't we just make more of it? It's not real. We give this value. Why can't we just print more? So, I feel like that's definitely a very popular thing.
I mean, the irony is like that would have been a joke, 20 years ago. Like if you wanted to just make a straw man or a caricature of, imagine someone who doesn't know anything about doesn't know the first thing about economics and say, well, why doesn't the government just print $1 million and give it to each person and we'll all be millionaires? Yes. Right. And then you would say, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, that's good for an 8-year-old, but here's why. And now it's got to, no, we have PhDs basically saying that. And, the arguments, in other words, they've now taken the argument to the next, now the argument's 7 more layers deep. But I want to say, yes, that initial shock of why don't we just make everyone a billionaire by printing up billions of dollars and handing it out to people? And the appeal of that, I think, is what's getting people to like MMT. Like they're like, yeah, why
it's
can't
a little
we do
bit
that?
different than Keynesian. It's kind of like is it like basically a offshoot of Keynesian economics, pretty much? I
mean, so as far as like the historical trees of the doctrines, it's the precursor. So modern monetary theory, like the immediate founder is this guy Warren Mosler, who was actually like a bond trader in the late 70s and early 80s. When he just developed a system. But then once that was up and running and he had some disciples and whatever, they kind of looked and said, in terms of the history of economic thought, this is actually, it harkens back. This guy's name was Abel Lerner and it was called functional finance. And I think he was big in like the 40s. Abel Lerner was, I think he was just a socialist in terms of his theory. So in terms of relation to Keynesianism, obviously there's lots of nuances. And if you talk to the different members of these schools, besides me, who disagrees with both of them, they'd give you a better description. But I think big picture, the Keynesians say, yeah, the classical free market type economists are right when we're at full employment. And in that kind of a situation, if the government spends more, that means the private sector has to spend less. And if the government makes more tanks, then there's less steel for cars, and there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
But if you're in the midst of a bad recession or a depression, the Keynesians would say, then those trade-offs disappear and the government can spend more and that helps things. but for the Keynesian, it's kind of like, oh, and under certain circumstances, the old rules break down, and then there's this role for government deficit spending. Whereas with the MMTers, it's more of, no, this is an entirely new framework. It's not just that, oh, in certain scenarios, the old way of thinking, no, in general, the old way of thinking is just wrong, period. It's almost like backwards.
It
and
didn't
then this
even
is the way
take them 2 years after ratifying the Constitution to start printing dollars that meant nothing. So, like, obviously, like they had to create $400,000 worth of greenbacks to pay their soldiers during the American Revolution, just so that, which was not a government-backed currency at all at that time. They just printed them out and hoped that it caught on. And I mean, this is a different time frame, obviously, and that debt was paid off. So I mean, we're talking about a different currency and a different time frame altogether. Now it's not compounding with all the crazy interest and stuff like that. But you know, I think that, like, you know, people don't really understand. Like in New Hampshire, like the libertarians here, at least, we're trying to start paying each other in gold backs. Like I just DJ'd an event on Saturday. I think I got like, I don't know, like 30 gold backs, which is like, I don't know, each gold back's worth like $5. It's like based on the real gold type of thing. We've completely lost sight of the whole like gold standard entirely in America.
Along those lines, I was at a pork fest a while ago where maybe you guys have seen these too. It was like a laminated sort of not index card, like business card size thing that had a dime inside of it that was, you know, pre-1961 or something. And so it had silver content. And then it just said, you know, at various prices of silver, this is how much this thing is worth. So what they were trying to be careful to do was, because there was some guy that had gone to jail for issuing things that was like a, you know, gold-backed dollar or something like that. And so they were just trying to be clear. No, this is just a U.S. coin. We're not saying it's anything else. We're just pointing out the silver content of this and how much it would be, you know. And so
that's what gold backs are. I mean,
that's what
back is like 1,000th of an ounce of gold. So no matter what, it's always going to have that gold value. Even if you could probably consider it worth like one gold back is probably worth like $4 or $5. You know, if you're talking about like what it's actually economic, like
but doesn't gold value fluctuate too?
Yes,
right,
exactly. So, but as gold keeps going up, like last Pork Fest, they were saying that one gold back was worth $3. This year, they were just basically saying one gold back, you can equivalent it to $5. You know what I mean? So as the gold price goes up and fluctuates, you know, so does that value. Now, obviously, our paper dollars have nothing close to this. We're just running on trust at this point.
Can't people just lie? Say
just
how
lying.
much like say that the gold back is worth more. See, at this, I was like, people are trying to pay me in gold backs, and I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know what this is. I don't know what it's worth.
I told her, I was
and
like
if there's an exchange rate somewhere, like on the internet, is there something I can like look at? But
I had heard about,
the idea.
I forgot. What is it? It's like what, a note that has actual gold, like a
Ben,
layer of gold on it.
Yeah, I've got some. I can grab one real quick. One sec. Yeah, like looks like this.
Okay. Yeah.
And it has, I mean, this one is one. It says on it 1/1000th troy ounce of silver or gold.
So I guess you could probably look up what that's worth.
Yeah, and then like 5 is 1/200th of an ounce, and then I have a 10 here too, which is 1/100th of an ounce. I think like really it comes down to like it always fluctuates based on the price of gold. You can go to Defy the Grid, and they'll tell you basically what it's worth. Whereas like you'll buy it from them, I think they're like $4 or $5 each. You can sell it back to them for fiat money for like $3.50 and each or something like that, just like you would if you're going to sell gold at a pawn.
So I guess the issue there and what their business model must be is to like, it has to be hard to counterfeit that. And then people have to trust that, well, no, if you see this and it looks like it's quote legitimate, they really do have the gold content in there.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for,
I don't think it'd be possible to counterfeit this, to be honest with you. Like it'd be very difficult and completely impractical to counterfeit. I mean, it would just be completely impractical to counterfeit something that has
well, I mean, I don't think it's widespread enough for it to be worth the energy to counterfeit, right? Like how many people probably use
I mean, like here, I mean, in New Hampshire, there's like over 200 businesses that accept gold backs as currency. I know of somebody who went to an Ace Hardware and bought over $200 worth of tools with gold backs. So yeah, this is a real story.
Well, okay. And on that note, How do you feel about cryptocurrency? What's your take?
So I love that it exists. I don't want to hold myself out as a bigger user of it than, I have some Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum thing, but I never like got into dozens of different types of coins. So for me, like as an economist, yes, I love that it exists. I think it's showing, just like with Uber, for example, economists had been writing for decades about, hey, we should deregulate the taxi cab industry, that it doesn't serve any function and blah, blah, blah. If you had more competition, it would lower prices, improve quality. And that didn't really do much for the public. But when Uber and then Lyft came in and people could see with their own eyes that, no, this does work. And then when the taxi cab lobby
didn't like it though.
Right. Tried to say, oh no, this is unsafe. We got to regulate them. We can't have that because you could get killed by a crazy, Uber driver. And people just know that they're just, so I'm saying like with the existence of, the creation of Bitcoin, its adoption around the world and everything kind of shows you don't need the state to issue the money. Right. Like, so I think there's that element just in terms of just showing people. And so at least that's now a thing, like you can be talking to a regular crowd. And if I'm speaking about, hey, the virtues of market produced money, I can just refer to that, even though it's not like it's a money per se, it's not like there are people using it and not relying on other types of currencies, but regular people now at this point have heard enough about it and understand like, okay, yeah, I get what he's saying, that we could logically imagine this sort of system in this if the government didn't make the money. So that there's that element. Also, I think like what I'm doing with my company now in Infinio is we're taking all sorts of assets and putting them on the blockchain, different types of blockchains. So I think what Bitcoin showed was it was not just that particular thing, like, or cryptocurrencies in general, but even broader, that this new technology of blockchains is a way of transferring assets from people in a decentralized peer-to-peer manner. That I think is also, just going to continue to develop, and 20 years from now, people will look back and think that was really, there's AI, and then the more use of blockchain, I think, is going to be considered a huge transformation in human society.
And like, given that, like, I'm getting the vibe, and I would agree that you'd be against centralized digital currency around the government. And I know Donald Trump that was one of the things he was saying he was going to do.
Wait, what did he buy? Like, did he say he was pro CBDC? Or he
said no, he's going to buy like, I don't know, like $100 billion worth of Bitcoin or something like that, and hopefully try to leverage it to try to help pay off some of the debt or something like that. Or I don't know what the fuck he's going to do with it. But in my opinion, the second the government starts getting involved with these cryptocurrencies on like a socialized scale is what it is, like it completely loses its value. I don't know.
Right. So just is my understanding, just to clarify, as to what Trump is, again, Trump says a lot of stuff, but yeah, he a while ago, like 3 to 4 months ago, I think, came out officially against CBDCs, and the crowd responded well. And he was like, oh, you guys are smart, because it was clear he had just recently learned it. I think Vivek might have been the one or one of the first ones to kind of tell him, this is what this is. And I think it would be good for your base or whatever if you came out against it and you get some support. And so Trump, like I said, this is earlier this year, but several months ago, got a reaction from the crowd and was kind of, joking about how you guys must be insiders, when I was like, no, people have known about this, Mr. Trump.
For years, actually.
At the recent Bitcoin conference in Nashville, there were several U.S. political figures, including Trump, and I think RFK Jr. said some stuff too about, hey, why don't we, follow El Salvador's lead or whatever, instead of the U.S. being behind on this, let's start, just like how the U.S. has gold reserves, let's start accumulating Bitcoin reserves, as opposed to a CBDC, right? So just like, it's not like the U.S. government issues gold or something. They happen to own gold.
Do you think that's a good idea?
So
it would make the value of my Bitcoin go up, right?
Yes, right. So I think
good for me.
Right. So I think lots of Bitcoin holders were enthusiastic. I'm not saying that they were being cynical or something, but it'd be hard to divorce yourself from the fact that, well, no, if the U.S. government started mass buying Bitcoin, that would certainly push up the dollar price of Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And so that would benefit you. I'm leery of it because that would give the government just the ability to move the market more and just, give them in general. I don't trust the U.S. government.
They can manipulate it easily.
Yeah. So, I mean, even like if the U.S. government came out and said, hey, I think everyone should read Robert Murphy's textbooks, I would be very suspicious and say, I don't think that's a good idea. You know what I mean? Like if we're also, I could come up with 9 different reasons why they would worry me if they did that. Like I think I don't know if you guys know this, the WEF actually recommended one of my books.
Oh, wow.
There was a blurb that came out. It was like in 2023 at some point. It came out. It was like, top 5 most interesting books you should read. And mine was one of them, my Understanding Money Mechanics.
You're officially a Fed.
I know. So, I mean, people were
you said you liked the Beatles.
Yeah, well,
I was suspicious.
Yeah.
But, now that the WEF has recommended your book.
But I probably wouldn't have brought it up to you if I really had been an insider. So anyway, it's,
Wait, so why did they break? Do you know like how that happened? Like how you got on their radar?
I don't know. It was a very quick, it was like the whole video was like 45 seconds or something. Well, no, it was probably more like 2 minutes where they were summarizing 5 new books that you should read or something if you want to understand financial markets. So they only devoted 10 seconds to my book. It's not, I don't even know if the person doing the review had read it, or maybe, maybe it was just some intern that got an assignment and I don't know, to answer your question, Bray, but it wasn't like they went in and, this will teach you the secret of how central bankers are trying to take over the world. Or, you know what I mean? Like they didn't say that. I think it was just said, this is a good primer to understand money and banking.
Regardless if they're like evil swamp creatures or not. Congrats. That is actually pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was, I'm glad it was funny that it happened. And I was kind of like, oh, that's good to be noticed. But
that's really,
but it did
really cool.
kind of disturb. I was wondering like, how did that happen? Was it just at a low enough level? They're not all, tuned in and getting their memo from Klaus Schwab about this is how we're going to, I don't know.
Yeah, imagine getting name dropped by the WEF. Like I can't even imagine what your reaction was.
At first, I thought it was a joke. I thought one of my fans took their thing and spliced in my book. That's actually what my first thing was. And I was like, ha ha. And I was looking, I was like, no, this looks like it's real. Yeah. So.
I mean, I do think that there is kind of this overemphasis of like I'm an optimist, I'm not like as much of a doomer as a lot of libertarians. And I think that there's this overemphasis on like this deep state and how it operates. Like I actually think a lot of it is just incompetence. And a lot of like, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And a lot of these people, even the WEF people, like Tulsi Gabbard was in the WEF. Like there's a lot of people that were involved with them. I don't think it's like, oh, they're all these evil, like deep state people and they're just all like sitting there trying to like take over the world. Like I think that there are a lot of people that probably have genuinely think that they just know better and that they're trying to give good advice, and like I think it's a lot of people just that are incompetent and it's not so much malicious. There's like this thing where everyone thinks that everyone's like maliciously out to get them, and I think it's way more realistic that it's based on just people being retarded.
Yeah, I agree with that. Certainly, again, especially if you're like saying the lower level, people in the pyramid, like as you move up the ranks. I mean, also too, I think it's easy for people who don't have any power to just say, "Oh, I would be very pure. I would," but like if you really, if it were really up to you and you could do something that's going to save, they're going to prevent a war and is going to spare millions of lives, but you got to take out these 10 dissidents over here. And you got to just disappear them. You know what I mean? Like it's easy for people to just say, well, no, you can't hurt an innocent person, period. That's the end of the story. Immanuel Kant said so. But it's easy to say that when that's not really the choice you're facing. You know what I mean? So I think, like the classic power corrupts. I think that's real. I think these people, as they get higher up and as they start making decisions and they get drunk with power, and I think it messes with them. And after a while, they're just like, no, my buddies and we're in this clique and we kind of run the world. And you people out there, the masses, you have no idea what we know. You're so naive. You don't know anything. And yes, if we let you just have elections and pick things, millions of people will die for no reason because you're all a bunch of idiots. You don't, you're not wrong. Millions of people are stupid and they do make dumb decisions. You know what I mean? So democracy is not a good system, right? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and because I love strategy games, right? And like, so I understand. Like there is a lot of trade-offs, right? Like you can't, it's like you wish everything could be perfect, but that's just not the world. And it's not how a strategy, of course I am. I correlate everything to Civ. I love that game. So, But like, there's just trade-offs, you know, like if you want your economy to be good, there are other things that are going to suffer, or like if you're a warmonger, your economy might suffer, you know, but like, or if someone attacks, you have to kind of like figure out where to like put your energy. And I think that this is why, one reason why personally I kind of avoid the topic of foreign policy, just because I know that like if I was at the top, like I don't know what the decisions they're making. Right. So like I could say from where I sit, like, oh, that's a horrible idea. I can't believe you would do that. But like, how am I supposed to know if I'm not in that position and what the trade-off is?
Right.
Like the long-term.
Yep. I think the three of us, we have a much closer to home example of this. And I don't know if it'll be fun to bring this up or it'll be like, oh, geez, Bob, don't go to that. But like, look at what's happening with the Libertarian Party, right? I think we all are friends with some of the people involved and, you know, I'll say that I'm not going to take sides right here, but I can understand some people looking at like Angela and saying, what the heck is she doing? She's allying with what is it? Is she trying to destroy the party? Was she a shill all along? But then I can see from her point of view and be like, no, if what we're trying to do is actually promote liberty, like instead of just, you know, getting behind our guy that we don't care that much about, why don't we build bridges and actually try to do something? You know what I mean? So I can see how both people can totally believe that what they're doing is the right thing. And the other side are monsters. And I can't even believe they would do. So if it's something as relatively inconsequential as what should the Libertarian Party do over the next 2 years, can you imagine if you actually had a nuclear stockpile at your disposal? You know what I mean? And you were running, you know, the deep state on behalf of the U.S. government, and you had alliances with people in Britain and whatever, and all these intelligence agencies are giving you, and you know all kinds of stuff going on. And oh yeah, the Moscow's doing this to us, and we got these groups over here, and and all this stuff going on. And yeah, I could see how after a while you would just think, no, we're operating on a different level. The normal rules of morality don't apply to us, because no matter what we do, millions of people could possibly die, and so we're just going to try to do the right thing. And I can see how that would just mess with you. Yeah.
Like hubristic, you know, it makes them like you get to a point where you just kind of become filled with pride.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's partly why I'm against having those institutions with such power, because I think normal human beings should not be given that much power. It's going to mess with you, and then you're going to end up, you know, going crazy and, you know, I would say demonic. So that's partly why, yeah, you don't give people that much power, because it's going to destroy them and they're going to use it and do horrible things with it.
I mean, it kind of brings up a point me and Brandy both wanted to make, which was like, how long do you think, and this is probably a complex answer, but how long do you think it takes for, you know, a president's policies or Congress policies to actually, could you, actually show like economic results? So we found this chart online, you know, and obviously like it's freaking nuts right now under Joe Biden, right? And there are certainly, without a doubt, a lot of things that are almost instant when you start funneling money into the economy, in terms of results for inflation and stuff like that. But there are other things such as housing, for instance, which I would suggest a lot of the current housing problems with like crazy high housing costs, that's probably more in line with policies that Trump had passed. And I have like a whole breakdown of why I think that. But I guess the overall question would be is like, how quickly does it usually take effect and show visible results, or physical, like, you know, economic results with stuff?
Okay.
Energy, 40% basically up from when it was under Trump. And it's kind of crazy, but
I mean, I'm just looking at I'm not sure what those, I mean, because I'm familiar with the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So I'm having trouble figuring out like for Biden's numbers, that looks too high to be annual, but it's not high enough if it's cumulative. You know what I mean? So I don't know what that means to say like food is 18.3. But anyway, just if we stipulate these as being correct, you know, based on whatever the definitions are of the people making that table. Yeah, with a lot of things like that, to answer your question, Ben and Bray, I think it can be unfair that for someone to come in, like, for example, if Ron Paul had been elected president and had gotten the Congress to do what he wanted, right? Because that's a separate thing. Like, I think, for one thing, I mean, I used to say when people would say, oh, what do you think he's got a chance of winning? I would, depending on if the person, like if I thought I would freak him out, and I say, no, I mean, his plane would crash. They wouldn't actually let him in the White House. But if suppose he did for some reason, like they thought, oh, there'd be riots or whatever, then Congress just wouldn't pass anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like there's some things you can do by executive order and whatever, but it's without having Congress going along with you. There's certain things you can't get too much done, even as the president. But to answer your question, if he had won, I thought, oh yeah, there would probably be a depression with a small d for a year, right?
And
like
then people would be like, see, because people act like as soon as you become president, like everything that like you do, like it's like immediate, like, oh, now all of his actions are why we have this recession.
So in terms of like standard Austrian business cycle theory, I would say that because the Austrian story is that the central bank plus the commercial banking system together like blow up these massive bubbles, these unsustainable booms. And then when they tighten this, a crash comes in, but then they reflate again. And so the only way to break that boom bust cycle is to go cold turkey. And to continue that analogy, the withdrawal is very painful, but then once you're clean, you're good. And so, I could said if Ron Paul really had, ended the Fed and took, put the dollar back on gold or whatever he wanted to do, there would have been like a year where, unemployment might have gone up to 15% and people would have been freaking out. But then once you got through that, then you would never have had a bad business cycle ever again.
Donald Trump's Twitter, like back on the 27th, made a post that, basically when he left office in 2020, whatever it was, the average home price was $307,000. And he also then shows that the average home price now is $426,000, 39% increase. Now, a lot of these like home price things, like for me,
that's
like,
the average, not New England.
It's way higher here, but a lot of this stuff, in my opinion, shows actually more poorly on him. I mean, I don't know, like in some of the policies that he enacted, like I would probably agree with, like, we need to have a better control on immigration, right? Mm-hmm. So the less cheap labor that's coming into the United States, the higher people are going to be paying for labor costs, and but it also like reduces the labor pool. It creates a slower housing development. But then you have things like the tariffs that he was implementing, which increased the number or the price of lumber substantially. Like I remember a few years ago, people were paying over $100 for a 4x8.
Do we get lumber outsourced? Like we get lumber from other countries? Do we not have enough trees? Like I'm confused.
We have plenty of trees, but we import a lot of lumber and like solar panels, all kinds of stuff. And the tariffs, obviously, that price is never reflected on the actual companies paying that voluntarily. They have to keep the profit margin, so that is always passed off to the consumer. And it results in price increases, which means that our homes, to build houses and to create more supply to facilitate, the high demand, it increases the price in general. And then you have, obviously under Trump too, there was a lower unemployment rate, which means that there were more people with jobs able to buy houses, which means demand was way higher. So the supply not being there also increases the price on the housing. I don't know. Like, am I missing something here? Is this? I mean, the current housing prices all on Joe Biden?
Well, I wouldn't. You could say I think the blame is mostly on things that happened during the Biden administration, but it's not Biden. And I don't just mean because the deep state. I'm saying it's the Fed. So one element of it is all the boatloads of money the Fed dumped in pushes up asset prices, amongst other things that, homes would be something that would be more affected by new money rather than, hot dogs or something. And then you had this perverse thing where, because then the Fed jacked up interest rates so fast, you had this weird thing where, because normally, and mortgage rates went up, normally that would make housing prices crash, but that didn't happen because the mortgage rate hikes were so severe that people wouldn't sell. Like existing owners who had, a mortgage locked in at a lower percent, if they had to move for a job or for whatever reason, they would maintain ownership in the first place and just rent it out. Whereas normally they would have just sold it. And so you had this weird thing where, the money when it was coming in, when interest rates were low, pumped up housing prices. And then even when the Fed tightened, because interest rates rose so much, it kept supply off the market. So that's not going to last forever. I think it's actually softening even, right now. But and probably what that's going to mean is once home prices do start coming down, they're really going to go fast because there's this weird thing where the fundamentals are all screwed up.
That's good news for us.
Yeah.
Trying to get a house
it's funny. It is a weird thing where, like, if usually a rising stock market, everybody likes that. It's like, oh, that's a good thing. That's a sign of prosperity, and nobody worries. Well, how are young couples supposed to get into Google stock now when it's this much? Right? You know what I mean? And I guess partly it's just because it's the dollar amount that you get in at. It's not so much like, oh, I need to have 10 shares or else how can I raise a family? Whereas you do need a house or else how can we have a family and, not be living with my parents anymore? So there is that element, but it is interesting how on the one hand, people like rising home prices, but on the other hand, they like housing to be affordable. And so there is sort of a tension there.
The people that own a house like rising home prices.
Right.
The people that don't.
Right.
So kind of reiterating something about Ben's question, how long do you think it takes for us to feel the effects of the decision of the previous president? Like how immediate to delayed is it?
Okay, so I actually think once the policy change is implemented, that the effects are pretty quick.
Really?
Yes, but there still is a lag because, like, if a new president comes in, it still takes time, for the Congress to pass the bill and blah blah blah. So there is a lag in that respect. So certainly, if a new president comes in, I think the first full year of his or her administration typically is not, is probably a hangover from the last person's. And then also too with this stuff, again, it's, if we're, we're talking about like direct policies of the federal government. If you're now throwing in the Federal Reserve and like the business cycle, that's, sort of a kind of separate thing where the president really doesn't directly have control over that.
Okay. Also, so give me financial advice. Do you think I do dollar cost averaging into crypto and the stock market? Is that good? Do you think that that's a good thing, or am I stupid? Should I not do that?
Oh, it's not stupid. I mean, that most economists would say that the rationale for dollar cost averaging, at least into broad sectors of things where you think are going to be good in the long run, is that there's this thing about you can't time the market, right? So it's a whole So this is actually distinct from the Austrian school. This is more of Chicago school stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the spirit of it is basically correct. I just disagree with some of the the particulars. But yeah, the idea that market prices are fairly responsive to new information, and that you wouldn't say, oh, you should wait until July 3rd and then put all your money into fireworks companies.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're going to sell a bunch of fireworks and then go, and for July 4th, you'll make a kill. Like, everybody knows that. Or like, oh, why don't you buy a bunch of, manufacturers of Christmas tree lights on December 1st? And so, it's real obvious in cases like that, but then just more generally, if you think that you just doing some cursory research and saying, oh, I think this is going to be a new trend, so I'm going to invest in these 5 stocks, chances are there's teams of people who have spent all year studying that, and they know, whatever it is you just, discovered. So that's kind of the rationale for saying, don't pay somebody to manage money on your behalf, just put it into a broad, put it into a mutual fund or whatever. Yeah. Yeah,
or like in crypto, I just do like Bitcoin or Ethereum. I don't really play with shit coins because I don't understand it, and I'm not going to take the time to understand it. So, and I just put a X amount every month, and then not thinking short term, thinking long term, like far in the future.
Right. So again, with you guys being relatively young, then the conventional wisdom would be, you want to just have your assets, you want to have a portfolio that is going to do well in the long term, whereas people who are, in their 80s, they got to make sure they maintain their principal. They can't have a bad year next year. Yeah. Because, that's how they support their standard of living. So yes, there are all those trade-offs. And I do think having, cryptocurrency, particularly if it's more heavily into, something like Bitcoin as opposed to these other ones like you're talking about, that kind of is serving the role now that gold used to serve, 30 years ago, where it's kind of like an inflation hedge.
Okay. Yeah. And so I have another question. If you could implement one policy tomorrow, what would it be? And it can't be in the Fed.
But by the way, let me just say, I'll probably get yelled at by people. Should go look at Infinio.ai, which is my company for, financial stuff. But in terms of, we don't pick stocks or anything. I'm just saying, I should point people to that just to learn more about blockchain and how the future of finance is coming in that regard. As far as policy, and you said not end the Fed. So, I mean, yeah, I would, I think that, like, if a libertarian type or at least like if a libertarian candidate wanted to have a realistic plan that was aggressive, but, they could actually do something like getting rid of the IRS, like getting rid of the income tax per se, coupled with aggressive but not, ludicrous spending cuts, and they could sell off a bunch of assets. And I've done some work on this. So, I mean, I could come up with a plan where the numbers would work. It wouldn't just be, don't do it, taxation theft or whatever. Like, I mean, in terms of real numbers and just showing, the deficit would be really high the first 2 years, but then it would start coming down and blah, blah, blah. And if they did this, and because the federal government right now is sitting on trillions of dollars of assets, things like, oil and gas reserves, stuff like that, they could sell off over time to try to fund that shortfall, as spending dropped to be, to come down to the level of consistent with the lower taxes, to balance the budget that way. And then, things like getting out of Social Security, you just start giving options to people to say, I'm making these numbers up, but the spirit of it would be something like, hey, right now you're 45, you've been paying into this for a while. If you right now just agree, you forfeit any of your claimed possible future Social Security benefits, we'll stop taking it out of your paycheck right now. And I think you could get deals where people would accept it, even like at a 3-to-1 disadvantage. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of the present value of what they're probably giving up versus that. I think they would take that deal just to say, no, if you're saying I don't have to pay anymore, sure. Like, I wasn't even counting on getting Social Security anyway, that kind of thing. So I think the official national debt, when you include unfunded liabilities, you could really whack that down aggressively by making deals like that. So to me, there's a lot like that you could do.
I think that is something that's like been lacking with the Libertarian Party specifically, is that, like, our candidates that are like running for president, obviously we have no chance in hell at winning presidency, but in terms of general policy, like, we can keep repeating end the Fed and repeat the slogan, but, like, do we really have a policy in place that's actually going to help us get out of the mess we're in? Like, you don't just need like really necessarily a 4-year plan, maybe an 8-year plan of like, what would it take to reduce our deficit, reduce our, our crazy budget spending. And it sounds like you have, like, I mean, it's not a
Bob Murphy for president.
Yes, please.
Oh, well, no, what it would be more is, like, I guess I can say, like, if Dave Smith had been the candidate and if he wanted it, I totally would have come up with a plan that, like, would have gotten, let's say, getting rid of the IRS, and the national debt would have been lower after 8 years than when he took office, something like that. And then going forward, having $500 billion surpluses year after year.
With something like getting rid of the IRS, so, like, what would be the immediate impacts that people would feel? Because that's the thing, there's always trade-offs, right? So, like, even when no matter what we do, we can be like, long-term, we know this is going to be the good, but what would be like the short-term bad that would happen that people would have to struggle through?
Okay, so the immediate effect would be, if they didn't, that would be a loss of trillions of dollars of revenue
and jobs.
Right out of the gate.
There would probably be a lot of jobs, right? But
do you mean from like the IRS employees?
Yeah.
But I mean, you could, what you could do for those people is just say, we'll still pay you, for a year's salary or whatever, based on seniority. If you've been with government service for this many years, we'll give you blah, blah, blah. And the key is, though, that you tell them this money is yours, like this, severance package, whether or not you have other sources of income. Like, in other words, you don't want them losing that, last year of pay or whatever it is, if they go take another job. You want them to go take another job. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, you're double dipping. No, you want them to, instead of going to the IRS every day, go make donuts at Dunkin' Donuts or something, do something productive. Like, that's good. That's not hurting anybody if you're not sitting at home watching TV, collecting a government paycheck. And so yeah, I mean, there is that element, but like I said, those people don't need to lose their salary right away. You could kind of phase that out. But no, the real issue would be if you stopped that taxation and the government spending also didn't get chopped, then the deficit would be humongous, right? And so you'd start really piling up debt even faster than we're doing now. And so if there wasn't a game plan in place to show investors around the world, yes, the deficit right now is, $9 trillion this year, but don't worry, we've got a plan that it's going to be down to, $3 trillion next year, and then there's going to run a surplus, and that might cause the dollar to crash or cause interest rates to spike, and that would be painful to everybody, every American. So that's the issue. So then you would have to also credibly start slashing spending, and that's what would be painful to people, that whoever was getting that money right now, that all of a sudden gets turned off. That's not good for them.
Yeah, and as soon as you start slashing like welfare programs, stuff like that, and people are going to start feeling that right away. But I think that like kind of what I'm hearing is like, in terms of like what, I don't know, maybe if I ran for president or Brandy ran for president, it's almost as if like our country requires a voluntary depression essentially to get out of this hump, because we've gotten into such a bad economic position that the only way out of it is to hurt for a little while. And unfortunately not everyone's going to be willing to accept that. But I don't know what we could do to, alleviate the hurt while also like, kind of like understanding like, like for instance, I don't think that like Social Security, if it was abolished, it would be something that happened instantaneously, because we have a bunch of people who are retiring, say next year, that like, this is what they are relying on for, but it's something that can be phased out, right? That's essentially what we're looking at, is like, it's phasing out all of these welfare programs. It's not necessarily cutting it day one, but like kind of, I don't know, phasing them out over time so it hurts a little bit less.
This is why I'm so passionate about mutual aid and like figuring out other alternative solutions to these problems. And I wish more libertarians, like I know that there are definitely libertarians that work on these things, but I feel like this is something that we should talk about more, is like start being like, okay, well, like for Social Security, for example, that's something that you could potentially like create almost like an alternative to it if people were allowed to opt out. The only issue is people can't opt out of Social Security, so you kind of would have to pay into both. But I feel like that's and I'd like to get your take on this, Bob. Like, what do you think? What do you think could be things that libertarian-minded people could do outside of politics, to help in these situations?
Well, sure. So, I agree with everything both of you just said there. And the problem, Ben, what you were talking about is over the years, not that I'm a 80-year-old guy or something, but I've seen how the situation just keeps getting worse. Like when I was younger and first getting into politics and looking at, policy wonk numbers and things, it was always, hey, if we don't reform Social Security, at some point it's going to flip and the amount of money each year taken out of workers' paychecks is going to be lower than what we're paying out to retirees. And that was always some far distant thing. And now that's what's been the case for several years now, right? That's been the case. And they're, withdrawing down the so-called trust fund and everything. And so, a lot of things that when I was younger were just, we better fix this ship because we're heading for an iceberg. Like we're already hitting the iceberg at this point. And so, at this point, no matter what we do, it's going to be bad. And that's partly what I would say. And I think that's part of the reason people aren't, the embracing reforms is because at this point, any kind of reform is going to be painful. And the problem is if you just keep kicking the can down the road, it's not like you're avoiding the pain, you're just making it worse, but if you kind of just defer it, like,
it's like
we want to deal with it.
going to the doctor when you're sick.
Yes, that's a great analogy, right? So now, to what you were saying, Brandon, so that's why I think that, for me, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but like a few years ago, I wrote a pamphlet urging Texas independence. I didn't say the word secession. I called it, an independent Republic of Texas, just because I thought that, would be less of a trigger for people. Because, I've given up. I don't think there's any way that we're going to get the right people to Washington and fix this in time. I think the system's going to crash before that happens. And that the crash is what's going to make people finally do something. But it's going to be pretty painful at that point. So, I think you're going to see both explicit and more of implicit de facto decentralization, regions just breaking off. And that's why, local communities right now, people should be building up alliances with their neighbors. And hey, what happens if the power goes out for a month? What would we do? And if this guy over here is like, well, I can get a generator, and you start cutting deals and, getting chickens and stuff. And again, not that every single household needs to be sufficient, but I think you need to start making friendships with people and getting networks in place that you do know, where would we get eggs if the store didn't have them, stuff like that.
I will say that's a great thing about the Free State Project is that they have a community here up in New Hampshire that pretty much if all that stuff did happen, I think that it'd be pretty self-sustaining. Like, I think that we have enough of a community just amongst, even if it's spread out, I think that's one good thing about libertarian concentration. But something I did want to mention is this is definitely already affecting people across the country. Like, I know of at least one city in California who has already filed bankruptcy. They basically can't pay out their retirees and their pensions. So people, they're offering packages where hey, I know you just worked for us for 30 years, but we'll give you pretty much a penny on the dime for your retirement benefits, and this is basically what is coming for Social Security. They can't afford to keep doing this. So, and certainly the taxpayer, it all falls on the taxpayer. And, it comes to when I don't know when this is going to happen, but the crash is coming and Social Security is unsustainable. There's going to be a lot more cities and towns that are saying hey, we can't pay your pension as we keep going, because for instance, when I ran for sheriff just a couple of years ago, the emergency services budget and what they pay out for this type of stuff, for every 3 police officers, or for every 1 police officer that you get, you're paying for 3, because you're not just paying for a retiree or 2, you're also paying for lawsuits and the actual functioning of the department right then and there too. So, it's just the system in place with their benefits and all this stuff. It's just unsustainable, and privatizing it, in my opinion, is definitely the way forward. But there's really little action in terms of actually facilitating that right now. So
yeah, right. And that, just to circle back to what we were talking about at the start of the conversation, that's partly why I think MMT is gaining in popularity, because I think a lot of people are realizing we can't just tighten our belts and cut spending and raise taxes and make this all work. It just doesn't work. The only way it is if we just print money. That's the only way out of this. And so if there's this philosophy or school of thought that is arguing that, printing money, there's nothing irresponsible about that makes perfect sense. I think that's part of the appeal of that, because people are realizing the conventional approach is, whether you're a Keynesian or an Austrian or a Chicago school monetarist, it's we've been painted into a corner. There's no good way out of this. And again, the MMTers are saying, yes, there is. And so I think that's partly of the appeal of that approach.
Yeah.
This is also a hypothetical, but just real quick, do you think that it'd be possible or even practical to decentralize the banking and let states be in charge of their own currencies and stuff like that? Do you think it's even a thing that could happen going forward as the national dollar keeps tanking?
Well, I think it's going to happen, like I say, whether it's explicitly authorized legally or if it just kind of states do it. Kind of like with marijuana decriminalization or whatever term you want to use, that there's plenty of places where, you can go to the local dispensary and get it, but technically it's still against federal law. But it's kind of everyone's looking around and it looks like the feds aren't doing anything. And I'm pretty sure our local cops aren't going to arrest me. So fine. I think it's going to be things like that, that if and when the dollar crashes, that's going to be the end game. So I think before that happens, the Fed will just print boatloads of money, and that will get through whatever the immediate crises are. And maybe they'll even start bailing out state governments and stuff. Because that was the thing during the Obama years. It was Illinois and California got into budget trouble, and they didn't do it, but people had floated the idea saying, hey, the Fed's buying mortgage-backed securities to rescue the housing market. Why don't they buy the bonds from Illinois and California? And like I said, they didn't go down that path. I think partly just because that they realized, we're kind of opening Pandora's box if we do that at that point. But I think that may happen, and that might be how they get through the next crisis. But then the crisis after that will be, what if the dollar just crashes and everybody, you know, and then gold and Bitcoin and Ethereum are going to spike, in which case, the states are going to kind of be on their own. And that's why lots of them right now, like this guy, JP Cortez, I know that I think it's called the Sound Money League he works for. They're going around trying to get state governments to pass legislation allowing, you know, like exempting gold and silver coins from state income tax and stuff like that to try to get an infrastructure up and running of people using currencies. And that's why I'm, you know, interested in like the creation of blockchain infrastructure to move assets around. Because I think we do have to build these parallel systems so that, when the main system goes down, people can revert to, you know, if people are holding a little bit of Bitcoin, if the dollar crashes and the conventional banks are all closed, then people can ramp up their use of Bitcoin quickly. Whereas if everyone's just learning from scratch, like, how does my wallet work? Then you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And like what you were saying, like these parallel kind of systems, like I think that that's really important just in general, like and not just on like the money thing, just on all aspects here is instead of this whole like kick the can down the road kind of vibe where like the MMT people are like, we'll just print more money and then everything will be fine, because they don't want to accept the bad that has to come, right? Because it's like a necessary. It's like if you have like a tumor and you have to get it cut out, and if you don't, you're gonna die, right? Like it, like I kind of see it correlated to that. Like you can avoid it, but you're just going to have to get the tumor out. So why not just prepare for that experience and encourage preparation? I guess that's why I don't understand there's not more of that. Instead, because I don't really love the doomer vibe either, where it's like the world's gonna end. I like more of like, okay, what are solutions? What are the things that people can do to prepare for this to happen? And instead of like avoiding it or acting like it's going to be the end of the world, come up with like tangible things for people.
That's why, like, to go back to your earlier thing, especially for younger people, instead of them saying, you know, like, what should I be investing my money in right now? I would say, you know, it's more try to get multiple streams of income going so that, you know, whatever your main job is, I'm not saying quit your day job right now, but try to get other things up and running so that, you know, if something does happen, you can switch those, you know, turn up the volume on those things, because you don't want to be in a situation where you get laid off because unemployment goes up to 12%. And then you're trying to start that new internet business from scratch when everybody else is too, because they're all laid off. Like, you want to have your thing already up and running and have your client base and your distribution and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, fortunately, with technology now, it is easier for people to do all kinds of stuff. Like, we're much more nimble and versatile now than we were 20 years ago. But on the other hand, the main system is much more precarious now than it was 20 years ago too. So it's kind of like a race to see which element's going to win.
Develop your skills, right? Like, I think that's what I try to tell young people, because that was like the one thing that I think because I dropped out of college, but I like was always developing my skills. And it was like the one thing that I think has made it so that like I can work in a good job now,
right.
You know? And like, I would say it's more important than going to college, significantly more, depending on what you want to do, you know? But,
right. Yeah. If you want to be a brain surgeon, you still got to go to conventional school. But yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for a while now. I mean, I was a college professor for a while, and I would say 2/3 of the students shouldn't be there. And I don't mean because they're stupid, or I'm just saying like it's going through academic, you know, courses like that. It's not for everybody. And just like everyone can agree, it would be crazy if everybody had to go get a PhD to get a job. Like, that would be nuts to force everyone to do that, to delay their entry into the workforce by that many years. Well, likewise, why does everyone, you know, why is it just a given that, everyone needs to get a 4-year degree? Why? Who said?
And a lot of times it's just not necessary.
Right.
Like, for the jobs you even want. Like, do you really need to do that to get to here?
Well, you have to,
like, you don't really use those skills at the job half the time. Like, and like more than half the time, you don't even end up doing a job that you graduated.
Right.
For,
and the other element too, and again, I'm saying this as a former college professor, is how am I trying to put it? If 2/3 of the students there were allowed just to go get regular jobs right out of high school, or, you know, go to a vocational school or something for a year or two to get some specific skills because they want to be a mechanic or whatever, a plumber, then not only would they be happier and they would make more money, but also the 1/3 that stayed in the college now, we could teach to them, like the ones that really are, intellectuals and stuff like that, and they're real nerdy and whatever, and they like just pontificating and thinking about that kind of stuff. So I'm just saying it would be better for everybody instead of just trying to force this outcome that just nobody's happy under the current system, and kids graduating with $100,000 in debt, and nobody wants to hire them because they don't know anything. So
I do think that there is kind of this thing, at least I've noticed in Boston, where it's like jobs will look for the college degree, unless you really have like the skill set that you can back up. Like they will, but it's mostly just because of, I think it's a sign of, it's like a signal.
Oh,
like a social signal. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't actually, they know it doesn't actually mean that they're like a good worker or they're going to do a good job, but it's just signaling like I went to college, and that's like important for some of these like more
literally like a social credit.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is. It's I think it's very similar to
that's
the
a whole like Tyler Cowen, an economist at George Mason. I mean, it's called, or Brian Kaplan has a whole book. I think the guy's name is Spence. Like they had the signaling model of education, and that's like in other words, no employer thinks, again, except for real things like medical school and law school and things like very specialized things where you do need a certain curriculum or whatever. But in general, you're being trained on the job. And if the fact that you have a 4-year degree shows you have a certain amount of commitment, you can, fulfill tasks, or, what I mean? So it's more about saying what kind of person you are for them to get insight into. If we hire you, are you going to show up? Are you going to be, hungover with showing up for work? Are you going to, things like that? Are you going to steal from us? So there's that kind of element that it's a screen. And if you have a 3.8 and you are a physics major, that gives a certain amount of information versus if you were a 2.8 and you were an English major, right? Like it's different types of information, not because, you need to know special relativity or quantum physics to work on this job, but just more, you must be quantitative and blah, 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 and ambitious because you took that major. So anyway, that's the thing. But given that, right, now more and more employers, I think, are realizing it's so expensive. And plus too, kids are having frat parties and blah, blah, you know what I mean? Like that's a very expensive way just to kind of signal this is my skill set and this is my attitude and this is my demeanor.
And a lot of them don't graduate with skills. Like I've noticed, like they don't really have skills at all, like, which means that they have to develop their skills once they graduate and do that in the workforce.
So I think, yes, especially with the, the crisis in higher education, the student loan and all that stuff, that system, I think, is going to have a serious quote correction. And that going forward, especially now, because there's all sorts of things, online certification, and you can learn to code and take tests to show Microsoft, look I can program in these languages, and you know what I mean? That you don't need to have a 4-year degree to prove that. And so I think employers are going to, come up with more and more ways, and it's no longer going to be a stigma that if you show up to an interview and they're looking at your resume and you don't have a 4-year degree, they're not just going to automatically assume, something must be wrong with you. Whereas, that was the case 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, so something that I appreciate, and I'm sure you'd agree, like Austrian economics and libertarianism, they do kind of play hand in hand. Don't hurt people, don't take your stuff, right? They kind of they don't really butt heads too often. But, I did want to ask you something I appreciate about you is that you are open about your faith online and stuff like that as well. And we're all Christians here. So I kind of wanted to see, how does your Christian faith influence your work as an economist at all? And is there anything that you think that like libertarianism, where they kind of just play into each other essentially, or?
Yes. So certainly, I guess one element of it is that, I guess going back to the anarcho-capitalist stuff, where you can say, if this is what the right thing to do is in terms of principle, I can stand on that. And so as a Christian, I think I'm more capable of just saying, I think things will work out, and don't try to just look at the big picture and plan everything and say, and deal with every last possible scenario and can try to control everything. That no, you're not going to be able to do that. God's in control. Just you focus on you trying to do the right thing according to what you know is right. And so, there's that element in terms of my personal morality and approach to the world, and the humility and just knowing I can't control everything. God's in control. So that does feed into, economic analysis of, certain things. Whereas somebody else, I think a more secular humanist mindset they might say, no, we can't just sit back and just make sure we don't violate property rights and everything. If it's all voluntary, it'll all work itself out. And what if it doesn't? We got to, prepare. And if it comes down to it, we got to take charge and not let, antisocial people do those things. And because we want to promote human welfare. We're not just going to sit back and do nothing. Right. So I think there's that element at play. So for sure, I would see that.
So
nice.
As a closing question, I have to ask this. I know you probably get asked every podcast. What are your predictions for the next 10 years? Or what are your predictions?
I thought you were going to ask why am I so jacked? That I get asked that a lot.
Who's your favorite Seinfeld character?
So prediction. So I think. So I've been a little bit late. There's this thing called the inverted yield curve, and that was my anchor point. Because I think that the Fed blew up an asset bubble, especially 2020, 2021. And then under standard Austrian theory, all that's going to be a big crash. And then historically, when the yield curve inverts, that has signaled an impending recession. So that's been the case for a while. That's been flashing red. So yeah, I have thought we're in store for a big crash, and I still think that it's coming. And especially now, frame? So I think the Fed's going to begin cutting interest rates because they're starting to see, there was the recent, the jobs numbers were off by 880,000, whatever it was. So I think more and more people are coming around to like, okay, yeah, it does look like we are finally, getting past this Goldilocks soft landing that people were saying wasn't possible. And I'm saying, yeah, I don't think that is possible. So to answer your question, I think it will be obvious by like first quarter of 2025 that, oh yeah, we're in a recession right now. I think probably down the road, looking back, they will say it started this year. But, I don't know if you guys know, but like there's a lag so they, like the one before the 2008 crisis, they said that began in December of 2007. But even the next summer, it wasn't obvious that we were in a recession at that point, right? So I'm just saying there's a lag. And then after all the data comes in and they look back and they say, the economy actually officially, was in recession at that point. So I'm saying, I think that official starting point will be at some point, whether it's this quarter or next quarter, but we might not really know it for sure until the following, January, February, March of next year. But I think it's going to be bad. I'll say that. So,
what is your prediction with AI? Do you think that that's going to have a positive impact on the economy?
Yep. Yeah. So I was really big on AI about a year ago is when I first really started getting into it and like, quote, having conversations with GPT first 3.5 and then 4. And it's, I sort of have gotten out, moved on with my life and forgotten about that initial just astonishment. Like it was better than some graduate school TAs that I had working with me on research projects in terms of if I had a particular issue that I wanted to analyze, if I, you couldn't just type it right away. You kind of had to have a little conversation with it to like prime it and prep it and like get the context. But once you spent 10 minutes doing that and going back and forth with it, it was amazing, because I know some about under the hood and how it's working. And like, it's not that the computer understands what I'm saying, you know what I mean? But it sure seemed like it did. And it was giving me very useful feedback. So I think as companies figure out, I'll put it this way, it's almost as if they have the ability to hire, if they had online workers, that were telecommuting that have IQs between like 85 and 105, and you could hire thousands of workers of that level of intelligence that could do certain tasks at $10 an hour. And I think there's lots of companies that could use that source of labor if they could just figure out how to adjust their workflow. So I think over time, as companies figure out how to do that, you're going to see, standard productivity measures really zoom in certain areas. But, it's taken a while, I think, for companies to figure out how do we use this, but I think it is sitting there and it just keeps getting better. I'm saying even if it just leveled off and didn't get any better, you would see over time as companies figured out how to use it, standard measures of productivity really go through the roof.
It really is. It's learning how to like prompt it, right? Like learning how to, like the language to use to make it do what you want.
Right.
I use it a lot for work during the day. because I have to churn out a lot of content for work. So there's like certain things where it's like, this is kind of mindless content. So you can kind of churn it out a little bit. And it's never perfect. So you have to always edit it and like fix it. But like, I think that it's like getting that like language, and figuring out like how to communicate with it. Right. That's like, that's literally how I would describe it. It's just figuring out how to like communicate. And that's another thing, for anyone watching, a skill you should learn how to use AI. Like, I think that's going to be a skill that everyone should probably want to learn because, and I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, it's going to take away jobs. And I'm sure it will, but I also think there's going to be people that just don't want to take the time to use it because it's time consuming, because you have to like, I don't know if it's ever going to get to the point where like, you can just like ask it a question and it immediately gives you what you need, but it is not there yet. And it's probably it takes quite a while. It's time consuming to really get what you want out of it. So at where it is right now, I don't see people will probably hire someone to do that so they don't have to, until it gets to the point where it's just like instantly perfect. But I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, so I think like in the Marvel movies, you know, Tony Stark, when he's working on stuff at his house and he's got his, I forget what it's called. It's not, is it Jarvis or am I getting mixed up? It might be Jarvis. Anyway.
No, I think it's Jarvis. Yeah.
Okay. You know what I mean? So like he's designing stuff and he's doing it and he's like talking to it and it's helping him. Like, I think that's what will be, you know, I don't want to put a time prediction on it because I'll probably be wrong one way or the other, but I think you're going to see that in the not too distant future, at least for wealthier households, where that's just going to become a standard. And then also too, there's going to be like a layer of, once there's the AIs that are talking to humans, and then it's like your AI system goes and talks to the AIs of other. So like if you need some other company to do something for you, you don't call someone over there, or you don't even talk to their, you tell your AI and it talks to their AI and then gets what you need. You know what I mean?
No,
I think you're going to see.
People are going to not communicate even more.
Well, but right now, I mean, that's one of the frustrations, right? Is getting something from these other companies because you're on hold and this and that. You do get somebody, it's outsourced to India and they don't know what the hell you're talking about and whatever. True. So I think that's partly what's coming. So yes, to answer, I think all that stuff is coming. And just like I know Jim Rogers thought the Chinese were going to, it was going to be the dominant force in the 21st century, just like the Americans were the 20th. And so that's why he was teaching his young daughter. He got like a nanny to teach her, Mandarin. Oh my God. Likewise, if you think, and there's a sense in which the computers are going to be a much more potent force on planet Earth 30 years from now, young people should learn how to communicate with them better. Right. So I think that kind of analogy works.
100%.
I think that like in the future, the standard for what wealth looks like is going to be so different. Like it's going to be, like people who are familiar with cryptocurrency, people who are proficient in AI, but also at the same time, they understand the importance of having physical assets too, because like you can't, obviously a digital asset can never be a physical asset, but in most cases, but
back to the Mandarin thing, I have to tell a story. When I used to, this was in my early days, and I was the door girl at a strip club, and a stripper came up to me smelling like tequila, and she's like, I'm going to tell you a secret. You better learn Mandarin because the Chinese were coming. Her name was Rainbow, and I'll never forget that. I was like, okay. And on that note, thank you, Bob. This has been a delightful conversation. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Sure. You can find me at on Twitter. I'm Bob Murphy Econ. The company website is infinio.ai, talking about all the blockchain applications and stuff like that. We also do AI work there. And my podcast is at bobmurphyshow.com.
What if people are going to buy one book? What book from you?
Probably, especially dovetailing with other stuff. It's the book that the WEF recommended. It's called Understanding Money Mechanics. So it's put out by the Mises Institute. So their stuff's all free. So if you just Google Robert Murphy Understanding Money Mechanics, you can get the PDF if you want, or you can get the physical thing.
Ben, where can people find you?
Twitter at the Emo ACAP, every Wednesday and Sunday as well on my show, Shut the Punk Up.
Woo-hoo! All right.